This project has its origins in a class assignment for our graduate interdisciplinary research seminar from last spring, which was designed to engage the students in one model of collaborative research, which is a key element of interdisciplinary research methods. It took as its template the symposium, which is believed to have been a common practice in ancient Greece. Plato often is said to have used the form of the symposium as a structure for his philosophical writings on the abstract ideas like love and friendship, with which he was concerned, as a means of exploring complex concepts from multiple logical positions in an effort to arrive at the truth about them. So it's a version, in a sense, of the Socratic method. For our purposes, the symposium served as a means of opening up conversations about topics that we care about and that matter to us to research, and exploring them from multiple angles, organized around presentations designed to stimulate our critical thinking and lead us all to greater understanding of the issues at hand. So these individuals are all students, as Dr. Thompson said, in the Master of Arts in Liberal Studies program here at ETSU. And as part of their research seminar then, they were charged with locating not only where their own topical and theoretical interests intersected, but also the point or points at which their individual research interests converged with and could inform one another's, despite seemingly disparate foci. So when I first gave them this assignment, their reaction was something like, but we don't have anything in common, right? We're all researching different things. So their task was to discover and choose an overarching framework for their analyses that would represent common ground of their goals for their research. And what they came up with was a shared lens for interpretation that could illuminate aspects of their individual inquiries that might otherwise go unnoticed. The group chose to research together the concept of stigma and its potential for use as an interpretive lens to then enable them to investigate its role in their own individual research topics. With its emphasis on recognizing the convergence of factors that produce a socially marked identity that can negatively impact one's health and well-being, stigma seemed an apt choice for their explorations, especially given their collective concern for conducting research with the goal of facilitating social justice. The ultimate goal was to open up their investigations to vantage points that might not immediately have seemed relevant, and to discover through their conversation, initially with one another and ultimately with their symposium audience, what modifications they needed to make to their original approaches in order to create insight they might not otherwise have been able to reach. So what follows are some of the results of their exploration. We hope you'll join us in conversation as they go so that we can all work toward creating new knowledge out of our awareness of stigma and its role in structuring both individual and collective experience. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So first we're going to just kind of go through and introduce ourselves, and which will also include what our perspective is, and then we want to work together with you all to create a working definition of stigma.
My name is Oluwafisai Ogundoro. I'm from Nigeria, and I'll be talking on the subject of stigma and gender work-life balance.
Hi, I'm Thomas Townsend. My area of interest for study was oral histories in Appalachia, particularly jumping off of the point of electrification, of gaining utilities. People who didn't have them then did have them. That's where I started.
My name is Kolade Olaya. My research was on the stigmatization of African traditional religions by Christianity.
My name is Leah Bevins, and I approached this issue of stigma from sexual health education, which includes teen pregnancy.
My name is Toby Oloyede, and I am actually working on stigma and how it affects domestic violence. But for this session, it will mainly be interpersonal violence.
So, like I said, we want to kind of work together with you all to come up with a working definition of stigma, which we've kind of come up with our own ideas. But if you have anything to add, we would love for you to add that.
Stigma invariably means labeling, when you label the other person. And according to Brenda Major and Laurie Hobrand, they define social stigma as a form of social devaluation of an individual or a group. Social stigma exists based on the disapproval of the passive social characteristics of an individual, which could be related to culture, race, gender, and more. And when we talk about stigma, there is a power hierarchy that exists. There is the privileged and the non-privileged, and it creates a binary. So there is an in group and there is an out group personality. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about stigma, we put it in dichotomy of social stigma and the self-stigma. And according to these individuals, according to Major and Laurie Hobrand, when we talk about moving from social stigma now to self-stigma, we talk about how do the stigmatized individuals, what are the mechanisms involved for the stigmatized individual? Because when we talk about self-stigma, we talk about the enactment of this identity, because you were once something before you became stigmatized. So we talk about negative treatment and discrimination. So because I'm female, the male folk or the patriarchal structure thinks I'm irrational, I'm too emotional. And so from there, the discrimination comes in, the stereotype comes in. Then the second stage is the expectancy and confirmation process. Because I have been named this, I've been named irrational, I want to act it. So the process of confirming it, it's already a culture, and I'm swimming in the culture. And the next stage is the automatic stereotype activation behavior. Now, because there is a culture created, I am female, I'm irrational, I'm emotional, I lack intelligence, so I want to act it out. And the same goes to African Americans, where maybe the white folk call them, they lack intelligence, and we see how it plays out in our school system today. And then the final stage is stigma as an identity threat. So I am threatened. I feel less of myself, and this is from the social stigma then to the self stigma, and this is my own working definition for stigma.
Wow, she covered it. Thank you. When approaching stigma, adding to what Fasaya was talking about, I looked at the history of stigma just briefly, that the origins from the Greek talk about stigma as an actual physical mark on the body. It used to be that the birthmark, particularly on the face, a very visible birthmark was seen as a stigma. And it developed to the stigmata in the Middle Ages, the religious experience of bleeding from the hands and the feet to simulate Christ's on the cross from the Christian religion. And it developed past into the psychological and psychoanalysis of being a psychological stain, a psychological mark of something that has happened. And it's about the power structure involved. Stigma cannot exist outside of that power structure. There has to be someone who is stigmatizing the other person, the other group, which I found the most interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I read an article by Halton Bueller, Phelan, and Bruce Link. The article was titled "Stigma as a Fundamental Cause of Population Health Inequalities." They define stigma as the co-occurrence of labeling, stereotyping, separation, status loss, and discrimination in a context in which power is exercised. It said several lines of evidence suggest that stigma may cause social isolation. Stigma is linked to poor health. Stigma is associated with greater social isolation. Social isolation increases risk for poor health outcomes. The stigma health relationship is significantly attenuated after adjustments for social isolation. Basically, what they're saying is when you're stigmatized, this could lead to this could reduce your level of employability. Because first of all, imagine someone who has been incarcerated. Obviously, you might not want to employ the person because you stigmatize him as probably being violent, although the person may be qualified for the job. So obviously, you stigmatize the person, and this could end up leading to this could lead to the deterioration of the person's mental and physical health.
I know there's probably more things to add. I really want to talk about how what Thomas was saying, it's usually a physical attribute, but I also think that it's really important to talk about that it's not just a physical attribute that's usually stigmatized. So we stigmatize others because of things that we can't necessarily see. We stigmatize others based on their mental health, if they are a depressed individual, or if they are just not mentally capable to do certain things that we can do, then we tend to stigmatize them. So it's not just a physical attribute. It's definitely marking the difference between you and another person and deciding that you are superior because you are not like them.
Well, before I undertook this research, my preconceived notion about stigma was merely separation and some sort of disgrace. But after reading Bruce Ling and Joe Phelan's article on stigma power, I was able to understand that stigma has a lot to do with stereotyping, labeling, loss of status, and discrimination. And they further explained that when an individual seeks to, or when an individual is interested in keeping people down, in or away, it means that they are invariably stigmatizing this set of people. And also, stigma power and processes allows for exploitation, allows for exclusion, and some sort of control. It is interesting that some of the ways in which stigma is deployed is somewhat hidden, and sometimes we misrecognize stigma. Yet there are actually some mechanisms of deploying stigma, and first I will talk about the direct person-to-person form of stigma, which occurs when an individual openly brings down the other person or the abused or the stigmatized fellow. Also, it is simply a form of blatant stigmatization. It is open, no need to cover it. The second form of stigmatization I found out is the structural discrimination. This itself is a form of institutional discrimination whereby there are laws, policies, and all sorts to bring people who are stigmatized down. It means that there is nowhere this person wants to go to in a society that already stigmatizes them and already brings them down. And finally, there is the interactional form of discrimination. And interestingly, this kind of discrimination is one that allows people to bring expectation to the interaction. For example, I see a disabled person probably wanting to enter a space that does not allow disabled people enter, and I think that, okay, I think I should help this person. We should note that is some form of stigmatization. Even though we are doing it not intentionally, it means that we are telling this other person that I know you cannot do this. I am doing it for you because I see you are disabled or you're somewhat stigmatized in the society. Thank you.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to that definition? Okay. If not, that's okay.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please.
Or can you think of examples in which either you've experienced stigmatization yourself, or maybe you participated in a way that Toby described in terms of that interactional stigmatization, where that probably wasn't your intent, or that wasn't the way you were thinking about it, but now that you think about it, it might have had an effect like that.
I mean, a lot of my identities are privileged, but I do think that I've been really thinking about my identity as someone who's female in academia, and the power structures in place in academia. And so it's become kind of clear to me, like, if I am very assertive, or if I stand up, or I use language that's too strong, or I send out an email that is firmly worded, there's backlash that is, I believe is kind of as a result of kind of what you were describing of like, oh, she's just being emotional kind of thing. And so, like, what you spoke about really resonated with me, because that's been something that's been on my mind a lot. And so that's my identity under which I experience that.
So basically, we have always looked at stigma from the lens of disability and mental illness. And I want to shock you that in gender work-life balance, we have stigma. It's a structural inequality. And what is work-life balance? It is the ability of an individual, basically in terms of an employee, to achieve reconciliation, integration, and satisfaction between the family roles, social roles, and work role. So in this lens of gender, I'm looking at women. So what do you think about women in a patriarchal structure, in a kind of society where a man runs it all? You have, everyone calls our work private, non-public, unpaid. You are the one that have to care. You take care of the man, you take care of the children, you send them to school, you have to know how they eat. How does that fit into the society? What do you think? We have a lot of women. How does this resonate with you? And so, before women came into the productive labor, which is the labor force, we were known for the home duties, and not until the 20th century that we emerged. And because of that, it has caused a lot of issues, and a lot of policies began with the women's movement, liberation movement. We had more policies that said, let women also be involved in the productive labor, not just restricted to the reproductive labor. And when we talk about power structures, then we talk about discrimination. And in case of work-life balance, what are the things women experience in their workplace that doesn't makes them feel like they don't fit in? And these things result into stress, cognitive challenges, behavioral imbalance, role conflict. When you get home, you kind of snap at your children, even you don't even have time for your husband. Or when we talk about the workplace, the manager sees you as a misfit. It doesn't see you as a female, as a person that has to sit on the round table with other individuals. So all this results into stress. It affects an individual's work-life balance. You can't think straight. And when we look at the home front too, my current thesis research is on gender work-life balance, and I'm looking at women in the banking sector in Nigeria and in the management consulting sectors, where there is a lot of stress, a lot of demand for you to keep up and work. And they have husbands that don't even want to help them in the home. Like in the mechanism I mentioned, I discovered that women already accept this as an identity. In my interaction with a Nigerian woman, she was like, I have to do everything. I have to create the cinema in the home. So, and even because she's in the management consulting sector, the KPMGs and the Accenture, she has to come home around 1 a.m., 12 p.m., and she can't attend to her husband. And her husband sees her as you are not doing enough. He doesn't drop the child in the school. She has to be the one to know who is going to pick up the child. She has to know who is going to clean up the home. And then we have husbands that don't help us in the home. And these are interference, because when we say we have work-life balance, there has to be a balance. unknowingly there is the stigmatization that emanates from the male folk. When you look at the organizations too, a man doesn't want you on the round table. That is stigmatization. There has to be an equilibrium to see that stigma does not exist and an individual, women, can achieve work-life balance. And when we look at even African American, I want to go into intersectional in terms of race, women, and women of color in America. According to the Catalyst reports, basically it is generally known that women are unequally paid in America. And when we now look at the color structure, white women on top of the range, then come Asian women. What is the plight of African Americans, Black immigrants, and Hispanics? Though the labor statistics answer that we have more women of colors on the on professional labor, but when we come to the professional labor, we have very, very, very low representation. Catalyst has a data of 10.5% Hispanics, Black women 11.4%, Asian women 16.3%, while white women also 16.3%. You can see that there is stigmatization, there is discrimination, there is stereotype. In an interaction with one of my mentors, she works at Cummins, and she says, organizations just try to be diverse. They are not diverse. They put you as a token in the round table of a lot of white men, and you are the only Black person, extremely young, and you are with 70-year-old man. You can't achieve work-life balance. She said she's scared. She wants to pull out of the industry. She wants to go to the managerial role now. They are pushing me out of the technical sector. That's what she tells me. So how do we achieve work-life balance? How do we achieve gender equality? And there are some reports going on. Medlangeti is saying before we can achieve gender equality, it takes us about, I think, 300 years, if I'm right by what I'm saying. So there is a long way to go. Work-life balance, gender equality, they are structural inequalities, and we make them thrive. The Catalyst states that Black employees experience a heightened awareness of their difference. You can see the automatic stereotype activation. They are aware. You are aware that you are a white woman, I'm not up to you. Because of that, I'm not committed to my job. I don't want to do a lot of things to actually meet up to the status quo. I think the awareness of their difference in the workplace, which manifests itself in disruption of sleep patterns, and that is where the issue of work-life balance is. There is that stress, there is that role conflict, there is that spillover that comes in, reduction of their sense of psychological safety, and diminishment of their ability to contribute fully at work. So, and this also invariably goes for the Hispanics individuals. What do we do about it? It's a call to action for us. We are not just raising an interaction, but we want to raise a call to action for all of us that feel we are in the privileged class to change ourselves, to take a caring attitude, to be more understanding, because we are all human after all.
I just want to make a connection to what you said with your example. It's interesting that a lot of what you say and describe, I think, is implicit in the example that you gave us. And that's in an academic institution where, supposedly we are very interested in being diverse and very committed to the idea that we're going to avoid these kind of stigmatizing behaviors. So,
my research is, it's underway. What I've discovered is I'm focusing on one family's experience, starting with the point where the family in the 1940s got electricity, in the 1960s got public water. Up at that point, they were using a cistern. Doing a series of interviews, multiple interviews with the same participants, same four living siblings, in-law, and also talking with some neighbors. What I've discovered is most of the participants don't want to talk. They were the poorest family in the neighborhood, and everybody was well aware of that, including themselves. So the first participant that I went to literally had 30 minutes of his history written down and read it to me word for word. He didn't want me to ask him any questions. One of the two other participants, they were wide open to anything, which I found interesting because one was the in-law, who was willing to spill all the dirt on the family, and one was the sister who had lived in Dallas, had lived in Nashville, was living currently in Knoxville, and had very little connection with Elizabethton. But one of the siblings refused to talk to me completely. And the reason was, she said, "You have nothing to interview. We weren't poor." Which is this saying it, these are my family members. This is my family. This is my father and his sisters. I know because I grew up in the house 400 yards from the house where they were all born. And so I know how they grew up. I saw the outhouses. I saw that the Civilian Conservation Corps came through and built for them. I've heard the stories of how my father had one set of clothes every year, and he got a new set the next year. Had one dresser drawer. They shared a dresser with his brothers. He had one dresser drawer that contained everything he owned in the world. He didn't go with shoes in the summer. In the winter, they got free shoes. And if they could afford to didn't get free shoes, he wore the same shoes for another year. So I know from personal experience, having grown up there, what they're dealing with. What I've found is the siblings that were avoiding talking to me are avoiding the stigma of being poor, the stigma of poverty in Appalachia, which in a lot of the research that I'm uncovering, Appalachia is one of the refuges of poverty in the U.S. Non-ethnic poverty. It's across the board. And so what I have found interesting in this is trying to, as a researcher, reshape my questions so that I am reframing my research as far as the family. I've had to reframe my research. So what I'm talking about is the fact that every one of the siblings that are living left poverty. So that I am taking away the stigma of being poor to focusing on their success in overcoming their situation. And it was the research on stigma that led me to understand what they were going through, how they were stigmatized by society itself and living in poverty, and how I could help overcome that and accomplish my research goals of collecting the family stories. So that's my experience.
So my research was on the stigmatization of African traditional religions by Christianity. I'll be focusing on Nigeria. So the British colonized Nigeria. The French also colonized some other parts of Africa. The Portuguese, the Germans, so it was mostly the British and the French. So the British colonized Nigeria, and when they came in, Kenneth Omeji and Chris Kwaja said there was a deliberate attempt at displacing traditional African institutions and social systems by Western forces dating from colonial history finds contemporary expression in the imposition of Eurocentric institutions, values, and traditions, which are parceled out and exalted as the path to modernity for Africa. So obviously when the colonialists came, they said all their institutions, including their religions, if you follow this, that's the path to modernity. So African traditional religions happen to be one of the institutions colonialists tried to displace under the guise of eradicating barbarism. Embracing Christianity was thus presented as a path to modernity. Obviously, traditional African religions have multiple gods, small g, smaller gods, while Christianity has the big God, so it's a monotheistic religion. Theophilus Okere said, Africa's great civilizational traditions, political, medical, biological, commercial, and religious ones have been inferiorized and subdued, in particular during the 19th and 20th centuries, by the colonial and missionary enterprise. Also, Kenneth Omeji and Chris Kwaja, they also talked about the dangerous stigmatization of African indigenous religions and its discord with Christianity was a phenomenon inherited by the African post-colonial states, which has contributed to the indignity and disdain associated with the religion in most parts of Africa, especially among the educated and urban-based segments of the population. So now yesterday was Nigerian Independence Day. Nigeria has been independent for 59 years, but there are still remnants of colonization, and the educated elites are the forces used to the forces who are kind of keeping the things learned from colonialism. So, for example, in the Yoruba traditional religion, there's this god called Eshu. And this god is known as like a trickster, a joker. His job is to do the will of another god. He kind of checks if people are giving the right sacrifices, if they are doing the will of this particular god. And if they are not doing the will, then his job is to kind of punish them. So there was a man named Bishop Ajayi Crowther. He was an Anglican bishop. So just like the elites in trying to uphold the colonial system, while he was translating the Bible from English to Yoruba, he decided to say that Satan or the devil was Eshu. So today in Nigeria, for example, if some of those who practice the traditional African religions, at the prefix of their name, someone could be called, like my name is Kolade, but someone could be called Eshu Kolade. So if you bear Eshu Kolade, there will be so many people who will stigmatize you and say that you worship the devil. And well, this God in the traditional African religion was not cast down by Jesus or anyone, so there's a big difference between Eshu and who the devil is. Although today, there are people who are trying to educate others that Eshu is not the devil. Even myself, even probably up till now and mostly before this research, I'm usually scared of people who have names that are related to particular gods. So even in our language, in Yoruba, there are different gods like Ogun, Oshun, the Eshu himself, and you'll see so many families who would have been bearing like Ogun, like Fisay's name is Ogunduru, but they will change it to like Oluwa, which just translates generally to who the supreme god is. They no longer want to be associated to those former gods. So because of Christianity and the elites who have been used to kind of uphold what was learned during colonialism, the traditional or African traditional religions being stigmatized.
Thank you. I think that brings up a really important aspect of stigma within religion and between religions that we can see all around the world, creating a divide kind of globally. But I am approaching stigma from the perspective of sexual health education, which also includes teen pregnancy, which I feel like some of the stigmas within sexual health education and teen pregnancy are kind of obvious because we have all kind of grown up with this idea of our thoughts on someone that gets pregnant when they're 14 or 13 or younger. And so kind of what I have learned through my research and kind of what we focus on in our program is looking at situations not from a one note kind of thing. You kind of look at all of the influences on a situation and what is creating somebody's situation in life, because it's obviously not just one thing. And so it's kind of just highlighted how if we look at a young mother, do we also, ask if they had access to proper sexual health education? In Tennessee currently, they only require sexual health education if there is I think, certain number of teen pregnancies between the age of 11 and 18 in a county. And so they base the need of sexual health education on young mothers, as opposed to just understanding that sexual health education is a basic right, And so another thing about teen pregnancy is that it's very much a gendered issue. We don't stigmatize the 14-year-old boy that got the 14-year-old girl pregnant. We just, we see the young mother who has to carry the baby for 9 months, and that's all we focus on. And so not only is it a stigmatization of young women, but it's also forgetting all the other factors that play into it. Which I think, which we haven't really talked about, but I think that it's almost using stigma as a tool to deter people from doing certain activities, having, premarital sex, which is also a huge issue, in a highly religious culture. It's condemned to have sex outside of marriage. It's condemned to have sex with someone of the same sex. That's not even included in our sexual health education. And there are certain states that require sexual health education to include, negative aspects of same-sex relationships. And so they are just promoting the stigma and promoting the divide and the hate that we see between people. And so I think that what's really important is to kind of remember that we always need to look at all the influences on a scenario, and realize that instead of thinking of different, which we were talking about this in our class this week and last week, is how, different has come to mean binary things. Different is someone is not just different than me, but they are less than me, or they are even better than me. If you're stigmatizing yourself, you're looking at someone else and you're placing them above you. But if we just change the idea of different to making it on an equal playing field, then we can begin to kind of break down the inequalities that are reinforced in our society. That's what I found.
Thank you. Well, for me, my research on stigma is basically from the perspective of domestic violence. And it is important to know that it is a universal phenomenon that is found in all strata of the society, cuts across political, the cultural, religious, and all sorts of spectrums in the society. It is also important that domestic violence is an umbrella phenomenon that encapsulates different forms of violence, such as sexual assault, physical assault, and even non-violent acts. So, and they include the psychological abuse, emotional abuse, and importantly, stalking. It is also important to know that stalking is a form of abuse. In the Nigerian society where my research is focused on, many women are violated by their spouses, and they suffer this in silence. This is mainly because of the patriarchal structure of the society, and these women are being brainwashed to accept the negative attitudes, to accept and still, irrespective of the adversity, respect and do nothing about their experiences. There is a need for there to be a balance, and that is why I am taking this kind of step to do this sort of research. Okay. From the different forms of stigma that I spoke about, the structural form, the interpersonal form, the interactional form, all joined together to deny these abused women especially in Nigeria, from seeking help. It denies them from disclosing their situation to people around them. And also, it allows for self-blame, allows for perpetrator blame, and these women then thereby see their abusers as people who are doing the right things or what is supposed to be done because of the structure of the society, where we see the man as always and always is the only one who has the final say in the family. This negative societal beliefs about those who experience abuse lead to internalized stigma, whereby the person who is stigmatized tends to believe that these negative attitudes are true, they are okay, it is fine for me to be stigmatized. Also, there is the anticipated form of stigma. All this joined together lead to anticipated form of stigma, wherein the abused personally awaits stigma, in that I know that I am abused, I know that I am in the lesser group of the society now, then it is just okay for someone to come and stigmatize me knowingly or unknowingly. This is a vivid explanation of what is obtainable in Nigeria among the survivors of intimate partner violence. An average abused Nigerian would not even speak to you about the situation. Rather, she would pretend that everything is fine. During the research last spring, we had to interview a person, and it was kind of hard for me to get someone to interview because of this form of stigma, because these people do not want to speak out. Okay. Yeah, and it is also interesting to know that the anticipated form of stigma allows them to remain stressful. It tends to lead to traumatization. They are stressed, they are traumatized, they are psychologically imbalanced in everything, and this results in every other thing that they do. And in conclusion, I would like to say that to build a community that is all encapsulating and allows for social justice, I opine that some sort of transformative justice whereby social structures are studied in dealing with these forms of violence should be taken. And because it is time for us to stop, it is time for us to stop giving unequal rights to a part of the gender at the detriment of the other part. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. So I think what we can kind of see from everything we've talked about is that there are so many different layers to stigma, and there are so many different aspects of it. I think between mine and Kalade's conversation and Fasayo's, we have like a manufactured stigma. Like it is created by other people to create a divide. And so, which makes it even harder to fight that stigma, What do you all have to add?
Yeah, the next question is, what is the way forward? Because I believe you don't have to have just interactions without acting on it. And we have been discussing on ethics of care, and I'm using this as a theory in my research, and over time now recently it's becoming clearer to me. And I think we all have to take a caring approach to social issues. We shouldn't take it's not my business, I'm not involved, it's them. I was talking to an African recently, and I was shocked by her statement. I was like, oh, you speak like a typical African. And later she was like, I grew up here, I was born here. But you don't speak like an African American? And she was like, I didn't grow up in the prisons. And I was shocked. And I had to tell her, you don't say this. And that is kind of a discrimination that is perpetrated between a Black person and a Black person. Mm-hmm. So we should not just discuss these issues. We should not allow it to thrive. We are born interdependent. Black, white, brown, yellow, red. We are born interdependent. I need you, you need me. So we shouldn't go out as if a Black person is hurt, you have to act. You shouldn't look at it as if it's not you. It is us. And when we take the us mentality outside there, we create a social change. The social justice is not just about the policies, because policies are just there, lying there. But when we don't act, we allow this kind of structures to continue to thrive. So we've talked about the family system, the workplace system, the state, colonialism, and how they make stigma thrive. I just want to say, for us to break this justice, we need ourselves, we need in the institutions, we need a more caring us. You have to be caring, you have to be empathetic, you have to be responsive, you have to be responsible for ourselves. We have to act. We have to ensure that this togetherness has to be built by us. That's what I have to say.
Toby.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually going to say something about the domestic violence and stigmatization before she took that up. It is also interesting and noteworthy that the stigmatized individual, as they sometimes get to a stage that they begin to reinvoke the stigma themselves, which is some sort of self-stigmatization. So it means that the stigma does not just come from other people. After encountering the societal form of stigma, the individual forms and all, then it leads them to become self-stigmatized. It means that they begin to stigmatize themselves personally. Okay.
Were you going to say something, Thomas?
I wanted to touch base on what Basaya was saying. I think in combating social stigma, not only to become more caring as a society, but becoming more self-reflexive. And why am I responding so strongly to this email from you, where I'm not responding the same way to the same worded email from you? Why am I holding the door for this person when I'm not holding the door for this person? It's, God help me, my Southern family is awful angry at me because I've stopped holding the door for women. I hold the door for everyone. If I'm going out, I hold the door for everyone, but I will not stop and hold the door just for, I'll hold the door open as I go through so it doesn't shut on their face. But one conversation I've had is showing that the other person is not capable of opening a door. And I don't want to shut any door on anybody's face. But I think going the more caring society, and part of the way that we get there is become self-reflexive. And why are we reacting strongly? Why are we doing the question everything why we do what we did?
I think this connects to one of the things that I found most interesting about their research findings about stigma, and that is their focus on the normalization of stigma as a tool of control, and the ways in which they discovered that even had an impact on their research process. Thomas, you speak of the ways in which the stigma kept people from telling the stories that need to be told, right? Fasayo, you focus on the ways that stigma keeps people from talking about the realities of achieving work-life balance depending on your gender, often your race as well, right? And there are any number of connections to the ways in which stigma actually had an impact on being able to do the kind of research they were trying to do. So I think that's another unexpected but very significant insight that we had from their engaging in this kind of project.
We have like 5 minutes left. So does anyone have anything else they want to say, or do we want to open the floor? Okay. Does anyone have any questions or want to continue the conversation with us? Yeah.
One thing I love about this panel is what a great job you guys did of covering how multifaceted and pervasive pervasive stigma is and all the different ways that it can show up that you might not expect. And my research is in trauma and women's health, and especially Toby, you talked about some of the violence and that internalized stigma that can kind of lead people to isolate and not disclose, which is one thing I'm interested in. But then also kind of stigma related to health conditions and how stigma also worsens health over time. So kind of two pieces of that. One, when we think about kind of women's health issues, things like infertility, things like miscarriage, where there's a health condition that you experience that is associated with a lot of stigma that's taboo to talk about, that leads to these kinds of feelings of isolation. So that's kind of one piece of that stigma in health. And then the other piece that I think is so interesting is that chronic, pervasive effect that stigma has on an individual's health over time. So situations where stigma leads to decreased help seeking, where they may not go into their provider regularly, maybe they've had a bad experience where they felt stigmatized by a provider, or for a variety of reasons, that stigma can cause exacerbation of health conditions over time. So that's just a little kind of plug I wanted to throw out that I find so fascinating. I didn't know if anyone had any kind of thoughts or comments or reactions to any of that.
I mean, thank you. I think that it's important to note that because it's not like we talk about stigma, but if you talk about it in that sense, it's severe, and it's, life and death for some people, and it can be, it can get that extreme. And if we talk about, the things that Toby was talking about, these women are facing abusers, and so it's just promoting that mindset that you're stuck in this and there's no way to get out. And so I think it's important to note how severe stigma can truly be for people.
Like for women in the workplace too, some people develop mental illness.
Yeah.
Like my mentor was telling me, I'm sick and tired. I'm mentally drained. So it's stigma, it's big, and over time I'm trying to be self-conscious. I know it because it's a social construction. It's already in us. There's that identity with trying to catch up with the society, and it's for me, it's overwhelming basically.
Or even the physical aspects of women who are sleeping less because they are
Yes,
managing
it's
the healthcare as
more
well.
pills and all.
Yeah, because sleep is associated with all kinds of health outcomes. I mean, the more we know about it. And then just cortisol levels. When we think about the consistent and persistent stress, be it, really obvious stress like you're talking about, or maybe some of the stuff that is maybe easier brushed off by those of us who, kind of like, oh, okay, well, that's just kind of like stressful. That work-life balance thing, that's not like over here. But both parties are living in a situation where, there's probably sleep deprivation, which is consistently associated with bad health outcomes, and the elevated levels of cortisol that are just baseline higher than is ideal.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Mm-hmm.
I'll just say real quickly, it also makes me think of one of the points that, Leah, you made in your research about sexual health education. Again, we brush that stigma off, and we don't think about the ways that stigma prevents educating young people about healthy sexual practices. We don't think about the ways in which stigma contributes to the pregnancy rate, the teen pregnancy rate, those kinds of things as well.
Yeah, within sexual health education, there are so many different stigmas, and one of them is even just within the dialogue, things that we don't openly talk about because we decide that's a private matter instead of a public matter, and yet it has these outcomes. In my research, I found that the sexual health educators, are often not trained well enough to be delivering this information anyways, or they're not comfortable with this information because they are also internalizing this uncomfortable, status of discussing sexual education. So it just it's like a snowball, unfortunately.
Well, and that also makes me think about what Kalade said about the ways in which traditional religion is intertwined with the social, the medical, the agricultural, the political systems. And that also becomes a way of stigmatizing not only those religious beliefs, but those very social structures that empower a culture.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I think it leads to health in Africa in terms of what Kolade is saying, because there are some natural herbs that Africans have that can kill certain diseases. But because we have embodied the Christian lifestyle, we run away from such. And it's very disheartening because my mom is recently sick and there is a natural herb you can wash and drink, and she's like, I don't like this. She's a Christian, nothing can happen to me. But over time, you have a result, pay a lot of money.
I think we're out of time. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us for our symposium on stigma today. Thank you.